My name is Oprah Winfrey. I'm 28 years old, a wife, a mother, and until recently, I thought I had a good life. Ben and I met in college. He was funny, ambitious, and had a smile that made you feel like you were the only one in the room. I was drawn to him immediately, the way you're drawn to the warmth of the sun after a long, cold day. We got married 2 years after graduation. I left my job as a retail manager when I got pregnant, and Ben agreed I should stay home to raise our daughter, at least for the first couple of years. He made decent money, and we both believed that our child deserved full-time love and attention. Our daughter was born in winter, during a snowstorm. I still remember holding her tiny body against mine, her skin so soft, her breathing steady and delicate, like the wings of a butterfly. I named her Grace. She became my whole world. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I cooked, cleaned, nursed, and sang lullabies at 3 a.m., while Ben worked long hours and occasionally surprised me with flowers or a warm kiss on the forehead. But everything started to shift the day my little sister Megan came to stay. It was supposed to be temporary. She had just lost her apartment, another bad breakup, another unpaid lease, and she asked if she could crash with us just for a week or two. I hesitated. Megan and I had always had a complicated relationship. She was charming, no doubt, the kind of woman who could talk her way into and out of anything, but she had a history of making messes and leaving others to clean them up. Still, she was my sister, and I believed in second chances, or maybe I was just too soft. So I said yes, and that's when everything began to fall apart. At first it was small things. She'd sleep until noon and leave her dishes in the sink. She'd borrow my clothes without asking. She'd flirt with Ben in that joking, playful way that always made me uncomfortable, laughing too loudly at his jokes, brushing her hand against his arm when she passed. I told myself I was being paranoid. Then, a few weeks into her stay, I walked into the kitchen and found her sitting at the table, in my bathrobe, eating the last slice of pie I had saved for Ben. She looked up and grinned. "Hope you don't mind. I was starving." I bit my tongue and smiled tightly. "Of course. Make yourself at home," I told Ben later that night, half laughing, half serious. He chuckled and said, "She's your sister, Oprah. Let her be." But that was the problem. She was being too much, too comfortable, too present, too entitled. And then she started criticizing me. Gently at first, then more directly. "Oprah, you look tired," she'd say. "Maybe you should let me handle Grace for a while. Take a break from being supermom." Or, "Don't you miss working? I mean, it's great that Ben provides, but doesn't it get boring just being at home all day?" I brushed it off. Until one day I overheard her talking on the phone. She didn't know I was in the hallway, rocking Grace back to sleep. "She's weak," she said. "Ben does everything. Honestly, I don't know how he puts up with her. If I had a man like that, I'd never let him out of my sight." My heart dropped. I stepped into the room. She jumped. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked her in the eyes and said, "You need to leave." She blinked. "What?" "You've overstayed your welcome, Megan. I want you out by the weekend." She scoffed. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack." She stared at me for a long moment, then smirked. "We'll see what Ben has to say about that." And that was the beginning of the end. That night, Ben came home tense, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded. "Megan told me you kicked her out." "I asked her to leave, yes." He shook his head. "That's not how family works, Oprah." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "She's your sister. She needed help. You can't just throw her on the street." "She's been here for 6 weeks, Ben. She disrespects me, eats our food, wears my clothes, and badmouths me behind my back. I'm done." "She told me you've been treating her like trash. Is that true?" I stared at him. "No," I said quietly, "but of course she'd say that." He ran his hand through his hair. "Look, I think you need to calm down. She's staying. That's final." I felt something snap inside me. "No," I said. "This is my home too, and I'm not comfortable living with someone who doesn't respect me." "Then maybe," he said, his voice cold, "you're the one who should leave." I froze. "I'm sorry?" "You heard me. If you can't handle having my sister-in-law under the same roof, maybe you should take a break. Go stay with your parents for a while. Take the baby. Cool off." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're kicking me out? Me, with our 4-month-old daughter?" His eyes were blank. "I'm not kicking you out. I'm just asking you to take some space." I laughed bitterly. "That's rich, Ben. Real rich." I packed 2 bags that night, one for Grace, one for me. I took my child, my dignity, and walked out of the house I had poured my heart into. It was 11 p.m., snowing lightly. Grace was asleep in my arms, and I was homeless. Thanks to the man who once vowed to protect me. Thanks to the sister who never knew how to love anyone but herself. I drove to my parents' house in silence, tears blurring my vision, wondering how I'd let things get this far. But deep down, I already knew the answer. I had been too trusting, too forgiving, too quiet, and now it was time to find my voice. My parents welcomed me like they always had, without questions, without judgment, just open arms and warm blankets. I hadn't stayed in my childhood bedroom in years, but that night, as I rocked Grace to sleep in the same corner where I used to read novels under the blanket, something inside me shifted. The world I thought I knew had collapsed, but I was still standing, and that counted for something. The next morning, my mom handed me a mug of tea and asked gently, "Do you want to talk?" I nodded, and everything poured out. The lies, the manipulation, the way Ben had chosen Megan over me without hesitation. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I was done, she reached across the table, took my hand and said, "This is not your fault. But now, it's time to stop giving people the power to destroy you." Her words settled into my chest like seeds. A few days later, I started getting texts from Ben. "Are you okay? I miss Grace. This is harder than I thought." I didn't reply. Then came a longer message. "I think we rushed things. Maybe we should sit down, talk things through. Megan's been helping around the house. She feels terrible. She didn't mean to cause trouble. She just wanted to feel needed." I stared at the screen. Helping? That woman hadn't lifted a finger the entire time she stayed with us. I showed the message to my dad. He read it, nodded slowly, then asked, "Do you want to go back?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. All I knew was that something in me had cracked open, and I couldn't go back to pretending anymore. That weekend, Ben's parents asked to meet me. They'd always been kind, respectful, a bit formal, but genuine. We met at a coffee shop near my parents' neighborhood. I arrived early, nerves buzzing under my skin. They walked in together, coats buttoned, eyes concerned. "Oprah," Ben's mom said softly, pulling me into a hug, "we're so sorry." I blinked. She continued, "We had no idea what was going on. We thought Megan was just visiting. Ben told us everything was fine." His father spoke next. "We want to help, not to fix your marriage. That's between you and him, but to make sure you and Grace are okay." Tears sprang to my eyes. I nodded. "Thank you." Then Ben's mom leaned in, lowered her voice. "There's something you should know." I held my breath. She continued, "We stopped by the house last night, unannounced. Just wanted to bring a few things for Grace." I nodded. She looked uncomfortable. Megan answered the door, in your robe, with a glass of wine. The place was a mess, dishes everywhere, and Ben, she hesitated.
He seemed distant, cold, not himself.
I stared at her. She reached into her purse and handed me an envelope. "I printed a few things," she said. "You should see them." Inside were screenshots, social media posts Megan had shared, private, friends only, but one of Ben's cousins had seen them and sent them to her. There was one of her curled up on our couch with the caption, "Home is where the heart is." Another of her wine glass next to Ben's favorite beer captioned, "Movie night with my favorite person." My stomach twisted. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was truth. I went back to my parents' house that night and sat in the rocking chair, Grace in my arms. She stirred slightly, then nestled closer, her tiny hand gripping my shirt. I looked down at her and whispered, "You deserve better than this, and so do I." The next morning, I called a lawyer. For weeks, I stayed quiet. I focused on Grace. I rebuilt my confidence. I started looking for remote work opportunities. I updated my resume. I asked friends for referrals. I found an online bookkeeping contract for a local business and began earning again. Every dollar felt like a victory. Then I got an unexpected call from Megan. I let it go to voicemail. "Hey sis, just wanted to check in. I know things got a little dramatic, but I think we should talk. Ben and we've been doing a lot of thinking. He still loves you. We all do. Maybe you just needed a break. Anyway, call me back." I didn't call her back. Instead, I blocked her number. Because there are bridges you don't rebuild, no matter how pretty the wood. Weeks turned into a month. Ben kept sending short, lukewarm messages, sometimes about Grace, sometimes just vague attempts to make conversation. Never once did he truly apologize. Not for choosing Megan. Not for telling me to leave. Not for pretending our marriage hadn't been torn apart by betrayal. But I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I had work to do. I was regaining my strength, mentally, emotionally, even financially. I opened a separate bank account, transferred my name off the joint credit card, drew up a budget with the lawyer's help. Every step felt like planting a seed for the life I was building, a life without lies. Grace began sleeping better, laughing more, Her little body seemed to respond to the safety of our new routine, as if even she sensed that things had changed for the better. My parents were my rock. My mother watched Grace while I worked. My father drove me to the courthouse the day I officially filed for separation. "You sure you're ready?" he asked, hand on my shoulder. I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. The next day, I received a message from one of Ben's friends. Not a close one, but someone I'd always liked. "Hey, Oprah, I don't want to get in the middle, but I thought you should know. Ben and Megan have been going around telling people you abandoned your family, that you had a breakdown, that you left to find yourself and never came back." I stared at the message, stunned. I felt sick, but I didn't reply. I didn't have to, because I already knew how I was going to fight back, with facts, with dignity, and with witnesses. The day of the hearing came. It wasn't a full trial, just a family court session about temporary custody and visitation. Ben showed up in a suit. He looked tired, hollow. Megan wasn't with him, but her perfume was. I could smell it on his coat as we passed each other in the hallway. He looked at me like I was a stranger. That made things easier. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. His lawyer opened with a carefully rehearsed statement, claiming I was emotionally unstable, had left the home voluntarily, and was now restricting Ben's access to his daughter. When it was my turn, I handed the judge the evidence, screenshots of Megan's posts, the timeline of events, the letter from Ben's parents supporting my claims. Then I spoke, in my own words. Clear, steady, truthful. "I didn't leave because I was unstable," I said. "I left because I was told to. I left because my husband sided with my sister when I asked for basic respect. I left because I needed to protect my daughter from the emotional chaos in that house." The judge listened carefully. After reviewing the documents and hearing both sides, he made the ruling. I was granted temporary full custody. Ben would get supervised visitation every other weekend at a neutral location. Megan was not allowed to be present. The gavel came down, and just like that, a new chapter began. After the hearing, Ben caught up to me in the hallway. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice sharp. I turned to him. "Because someone has to protect Grace, and clearly, it was never going to be you." He looked like he wanted to say more, but I walked away before he could. I didn't owe him any more explanations. I had given enough. Back at my parents' house, I held Grace and twirled her gently around the living room. "You're safe, baby," I whispered. "We're safe now." She laughed, that sweet bubbling sound only babies can make, and grabbed a fistful of my hair. It hurt a little, but I laughed with her, because I finally understood something. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you end up being the ones you need protection from. And sometimes the only way to find peace is to walk away, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. 3 months after the court hearing, I signed a lease on a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't fancy. The walls needed repainting. The kitchen was older, but it was mine. Ours. Grace and I danced across the wooden floors our first night there. I set up her crib beside my bed, strung soft fairy lights around the window, and whispered to her as she slept, "This is where we begin again." The next morning I brewed my own coffee, barefoot in my own kitchen, and watched the sun creep in through the blinds. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to hurt me again. I felt free. Word got around. Some people reached out. Old coworkers, college friends, even neighbors who had heard pieces of what happened. They told me I was brave. Some told me they'd been through something similar. Some told me they wished they had done what I did. But I didn't feel brave. I just felt honest. And maybe honesty is the beginning of bravery. Ben kept his distance. He attended the supervised visits, always quiet, always looking tired. Sometimes he tried to make conversation about Grace's sleep schedule, her feeding habits. I kept my answer short, polite, civil, but never warm. Once he asked if there was hope, if maybe we could rebuild. I looked at him carefully. "You burned the foundation," I said. "There's nothing left to build on." He nodded and didn't ask again. Megan, on the other hand, never reached out, but through a mutual friend, I heard her relationship with Ben had crashed and burned. Apparently, once the spotlight was off and the truth settled in, things weren't so fun anymore. He kicked her out. She moved in with someone else. I felt nothing. No triumph, no bitterness. Just distance and peace. One evening, I was at the park with Grace when a woman approached me. She looked familiar. And after a moment, I realized she had been one of Megan's old friends. She smiled awkwardly. "I just wanted to say, I didn't believe what people were saying about you at first. But then I saw how you handled everything, with grace, with dignity, and you're kind of a role model." I blinked. "Me?" She nodded. A lot of women in our circle, they stay, even when it hurts. You didn't. I smiled. Not a proud smile, a humble one, because I finally saw myself the way others did. Not as a victim, but as a survivor, a mother, a woman who chose herself and her child over comfort and appearances. Now, every night before bed, Grace and I have a little ritual. We sit by the window. I hold her, even though she's getting big. And I whisper, we're safe, we're strong, we're whole. She doesn't understand yet. But one day she will. One day, when someone tries to convince her she's too much or not enough, she'll remember her mother's voice. She'll remember the strength it took to walk away. And she'll know how to do it too. Not with bitterness, but with grace. The kind of grace that grows from truth, self-respect, and love. The kind of grace that built the life we live now. Our life, our home, our peace,